Cognitive theory is really just focused on how we learn over time. Piaget talks about four different stages. Sensory motor being the first. Actually, you know what? I think we'll talk about these on the next slide. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Here we go. So, sensory motor is going to be from birth to 2 years of age. Basically, kids are making sense of their world through their senses and motor function. So they're touching everything, they're looking at everything. Just everything is new. They don't have experience to draw from at this point, so they're really just what does this taste like? What does this feel like? What is this? Whatever. They're learning through their senses. And then between about 2 and 6 years of age, you hit the pre-operational stage. So kids are much more likely to think symbolically. Their make-believe is really huge during this time. They do have some experience to draw from at this point. They're not quite. When I think of operational, they're not quite applying logic yet. So then you hit concrete operational, which is between about 6 and 11 years of age. So we are logical, but things are very black and white. Kids are able to grasp certain concepts. However, things really need to be, well, same as pre-operational. Pre-operational and concrete, we're really focused on kids really need a routine at this time, because like in pre-operational, if you break the routine, the world is ending. Kids don't understand that if we go to the park before we go home, that's okay. The world's not going to end if you go home every day after school or something. A lot of meltdowns happen because they just don't have that logic thinking yet. Concrete operational, they're still really tied to that structure. They need schedule, routine, but they can understand, okay, if we go to the park, that's like a fun thing to do before we go home. We will still go home after the park, and they don't need to have that breakdown necessarily. And then formal operational, 12 years, basically through adulthood, we kind of hit this formal operational stage. We're really able to start thinking abstractly. We can think hypothetically. We can think much more detail about things that we didn't really understand before. So things like religion, politics, friendships, things, justice, like crime. We can really think about it as more than, well, I use crime as an example a lot because I teach a parenting class in the prisons, and as in these former stages, you did something bad, so there was a punishment. But once you hit formal operational, you realize they did something bad, but yes, maybe the law is set up wrong. Maybe, it's just kind of this gray area. They were trying to do something to take care of their family or whatever the situation may have been. And you can really look at it through a different lens than, oh, you did something bad, here's your punishment. So it really shifts based on your age stage. Same thing, I always talk about religion with this too. In the former stages, it's maybe if you're looking at like the Christian religion, for example, I love Jesus because he died on the cross for my sins. Once you hit formal operational, it becomes much more deeper than that. You can think about what it means to your life, what value it brings. Same with friendships. In the former stages, you're friends with someone maybe because they sit next to you at school, and you know something about their proximity to you. Oh, she likes to play the same games as I do. Once you hit formal operational, you realize, oh no, they hold my secrets, and they we have these shared values, and we have the, whatever. It's a lot more complex and complicated the way you're thinking about the world than in these previous stages. Assimilation and accommodation. Basically, this is what happens when new experiences come into your world. You need to fit them into your way of thinking. So often something new comes in that kind of challenges what you already know, and you have to kind of decide, do I kind of fit it in with what I already know, or do I restructure my ideas? Wait a second, that's not at all what I already know, and now I'm able to kind of restructure my whole thinking, where I no longer necessarily believe what I believed before. I've taken these new ideas, and I'm gonna run with them. I think ideally throughout our life we're constantly learning new things, so this is something that we kind of shift and shape as we learn more, because once you learn more, you have more context about the situation. Some things will never have a full picture, but most things probably. But the more we know, the more we're able to make kind of educated thoughts and ideas about things. And do we fit them into what we already know, or do we just completely change the way we think? And that's going to look different based on the situation. Evolutionary theory really kind of comes out of this, some of these ideas by Charles Darwin. Whether you agree with Darwin or not, that's not the issue here. I think a lot of times, particularly in this class, we'll talk about how we've kind of been shaped based on evolutionary history. Because honestly, there's so many things. The way we do business now is shaped by our past. Is shaped by, everything basically is shaped by our past. So how that looks, how we've adapted, how we change, how we've kind of structured our world. So I'll certainly mention kind of evolutionary history, and give a lot of examples as they kind of come up through the chapters. So there's a few things going on here. This is just kind of when you're setting up your studies. When you conduct your experiments, you're trying to establish causal relationships. So why does this happen? And you have several variables. Your dependent variable is really your outcome. What are you studying? What do you think is going to happen here? So you have to have some variable that you're looking at. Your independent variable, you can introduce to see the effect that it has on the dependent variable. So if I'm using, I think a super easy example to think about here would be like a drug trial. So if you're going to do a drug trial, you're trying to see, let's say you've come up with a new drug to treat depression, for example. Depression would be your dependent variable. So how much depression do you have? A high amount or a low amount? To test that, to test what kind of depression you have, you need the drug. The drug is going to be your independent variable. One group is going to get the drug, and then you're going to have another group who probably gets a placebo pill, or no drug. They're just kind of business as usual. And see, does the group that takes the new drug that I've come up with, does their depression lessen? Does it get worse? What kind of side effects do they have? Versus the business as usual group. Do they have more depression? Do they have less depression? Does their depression change? Theoretically, it wouldn't change, but if it does, we can look at, other variables. But that's kind of an example there. And these are your groups here. I just said those, but I kind of missed that. The experimental group is the one who gets the treatment. In this case, that would be the drug. And your comparison group is kind of business as usual. They don't get the drug, so you want to see how they react. So here's just a basic sequence diagram of how, basically what I just explained, of an experiment. So you have all your participants. They get randomly assigned to take the drug or to not take the drug. So if they take the drug, they get special treatment. They don't take the drug, no special treatment. And then you're looking for changes in your outcome. So that would be depression in the example I just gave. So, and you can use that for any study. It certainly doesn't have to be a drug study. That's just a really easy example to put in for you guys. A lot of scientific studies use surveys as their data collection, because you can get a lot of them done in a pretty short amount of time, especially now that a lot of things are automated and online. You can get a lot of information really quickly. There are a lot of challenges to this. Some people lie. That would be like an understatement of the century. Some people certainly lie. If it's uncomfortable, if you're asking about illegal drug use, if you're asking about something like your personal sex life, tell me about, some disease that you have, or something like, if you're certainly asking, the more personal the question, the higher the risk of someone lying, certainly. Sometimes you're gonna wishy-washy on something and then you change your mind later. Sometimes the question was asked funny and I didn't really understand. Sometimes, gosh, I just want to rush through this and get the credit for the study, and I don't actually want to answer it properly. So I'm just going to say strongly disagree straight down the board, and that's my answer. So it really depends on, you got to really kind of look at and be systematic about how you're using these surveys, but it is still an effective method for a lot of research. And then ethics. All scientific research is determined by an ethical board. Schools have it, for example, the IRB. Organizations have it. There's a lot of ethical consent because, to be honest, when research first started, oftentimes it was not ethical. A lot of the studies where we've gotten a lot of information over time would not be appropriate today. And I'm certain we'll talk about several of those over the course of the semester. But basically, we do require informed consent. So participants have to understand the research procedures and any risks that are involved. They have to know that it's voluntary. They can stop at any time. They can get through the entire study and then say, ooh, I changed my mind. I don't want you to use any of this data. And you say, okay, great, thank you. Have a good day. Participation, so it is voluntary. They can call you a week later and say, I don't want to use this anymore. It doesn't matter. We have to respect their wishes because participation is voluntary. It's confidential, particularly that's important when it could be involving the law or illegal behaviors or things like that. The only time it's not confidential is if they report that they're going to harm themselves or someone else. Then those are things that we have to report. But otherwise, there's this really pretty strict code that we have to follow to get studies approved, and then when you're conducting the study.